Hey there, welcome to Psalms in a Minute. I'm Kelly Vanderwoudy. Today's video, we're tackling the 10,000 foot view of the 14 verses from Psalm 19. And Psalm 19 is a psalm of knowledge and glory and revealings of God. So stick around and join me in this Psalms in a Minute. Thanks again for joining me in this Psalms in a Minute. We'll get to that here shortly. A couple things I'm working on here. I know I hope to have something showing you a picture that I completed a project, but I don't. These cutting boards need to get finished. Today I will be finishing the Adirondack chairs. I have two of those that I've been building. So those got painted. The last of them got painted last night, and I will be assembling those today. And then I need to clean my garage. It is horribly, horribly dusty in here. Um, so that's my hope for the day. We'll see what I can get accomplished. But at least the Adirondack chairs I know will be assembled. And once this snow melts, I can get them to the customer. But Psalm in a minute. Let's see if we can do this in less than a minute. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Begin. The psalm was divided up into two sections. Verse 1 through 6 deal with the natural revelation of God's glory, so things like the sky, earth, wind, day, and night. And the name here that we read is El in Hebrew. The verse 7 through 14 is a special revelation of God's glory and revealed. So it's the law and given to David, and David's response to it. And the name here for God is the Lord or Yahweh. As a context, we don't have any. It just could be a personal declaration of David, especially in light of the psalm falling in line with the first book of the Torah with Genesis. But it could also be just David writing against all those who don't believe. And so he looks around and he observes them all. This is just what he writes. What I appreciate here is that the text goes from the grandiose in the first 6 verses down to the small in the final 8. As one author points out, David observes the natural revelation, then the specific revelation, which then prompts him to a self-examination. And all this makes sense when we look at the first verses being the power and grandiose of El, which is the bigness of God, and then yet David switches to Yahweh, which is a reflected personal name, a personal God, the God in which David and Israel know him and have covenant with him. Ultimately, David concludes with the understanding of who God is and how God has revealed himself in a way that is helpful for David. It's helpful for us as well. We're given this amazing revelation of God, and it should lead us to worship him in the grandiose and the small, from the tops of our shouting lungs to the smallest of our whispered breath. And in the end, God doesn't do this to harm us, but to bring us joy and joyful return into the glorious presence. And that is your psalm with milliseconds to spare. Stick around. I'm going to be rereading this in a in a slower pace. I will put down, it's usually somewhere here, where you can skip ahead if you don't want to hear that again, and you can go into what does all this mean? Where do we go from here? What does this do for us, especially as Christians, in light of us declaring that this somehow points us to Christ? It does point us to Christ. So I'll have that link in here. So what did I just say? This psalm is divided up into two sections. Verses 1 through 6 deal with the natural revelations of God's glory. So things like the sky, the earth, the wind, the day, and the night. And the name that we read here is God, but it's El in Hebrew. Verses 7 through 14 deal with special revelation of God's glory, as revealed in the law, and then David's response to it. And the name here that we have is the Lord, which is Yahweh. As to context, we don't have any. It could be a personal declaration of David, especially in light of this psalm falling in line with the first book of the Torah, with Genesis. But it could also be just David writing against all those who don't believe in God. And so as he looks around and he observes all of them, this is what he writes. What I appreciate here is this text goes from the grandiose, the large of the first 6 verses, down to the small, to the people, to the individual in the final 8 verses. As one author points out, David observes the natural revelation and then the specific revelation, which then prompts him to respond with self-examination. And all of this makes sense when we look at those first 6 verses being the power, the grandiose of God, of El, which is the bigness of God. And yet when David switches to Yahweh, this is reflective of a personal name, a personal God, the God in which David and Israel know him and are in covenant with him. Ultimately, David concludes with the understanding of who God is and how God has revealed himself in a way that is helpful for David, is helpful for us. We are given the amazing revelation of God that should lead us to worship him in the grandiose and the small, from the tops of our shouting lungs to the smallest of our whispered breaths. In the end, God doesn't do this to harm us, but to bring us into a joyful return into his glorious presence. That's your psalm. So, as a Christian, the arch to Christ here, and we don't want to skip over it. Let me get a sip of my coffee. We worship a God who's in the big and the small. We worship the only true God who, when we read the creation account in Genesis, created the heavens and the earth and the smallest of the small details within the earth, all from his voice, all from his presence, his spirit as he hovered over the waters, the expanse, the land, the earth itself. And so, as the creator of all things, then you bet the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim his work. The sun and moon and wind and rain reveal his glory. Paul writes much of this kind of same understanding in Romans 1:19 through 20. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. It's this understanding that God has revealed so much of who he is and declared who he is, that we have no excuse not to know him and see him and worship here. So Paul is very much talking about the power of God from heaven, and his wrath is especially upon those who see this and choose not to worship him or acknowledge him or suppress the truth, and who become godless and do their wicked ways. How could you do those things when you can see the revealings of God in nature? And part of this reality is that we are those sinful, wicked people as well. We may not be godless, but much of what we do declares that we might as well be. And so within that, God has given us special revelation, special revealings of him and his nature, his love, the way he works, the way he expects us to work as disciples, as followers, and how we should live and reflect his glory. And part of that as well, from that grandiose, we get that, but then there's the law as well, and that's what David speaks of in verses 7 through 12. Paul writes in Romans 7:7 that he wouldn't even know what sin was if it wasn't for the law. So God giving us the law is a way that he not only reveals who he is, but how he expects his people to live. And so as David writes in verse 12, that who can discern their own errors? Nobody can without the law. The law reveals that which breaks us and keeps us from God's glory. But it's also here with the law that God's special revelation that Christ comes to fulfill. Christ doesn't come to toss the law aside. The law still reveals God's glory and its expectations of his people. I had the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. Expectations of his people. But Christ comes to fulfill it on our behalf, right? And in the end, for me, this is a reminder of not only just how big and powerful El is, but how much he is Yahweh and personal, and he comes down to us. He doesn't have to become Yahweh. He could remain as El, the power, the grandiose, the big, but he has chosen not to. This is what makes Christianity so different than all the other religions. We have a personal relationship with Yahweh. We worship a personal God who speaks to us in ways we can understand. And trust me, I need simple words, and he speaks to me. Though we were still sinners, he took on sin for us. He came down to us. We do not go up to him. And so while God still gave us the rules and the regulations to live by, he knew we couldn't. So Christ comes. Grace arrived, and then grace remained. We will never be blameless, but by Christ and his work, our actions, our thoughts, our words, our non-words, they all become acceptable to God because Christ atoned and made us acceptable to God. That's your psalm. That's where I went. Those are the things that I see when I read this psalm. But don't take my word for it. Read this psalm. Dive into this psalm. Find good commentaries on this psalm Look at what other people have read and written about this psalm to where you can understand and help understand not only where David is going to and the words David uses and why he uses it, but how does it speak to you? How do you find your breath in it as well? So read the psalm, open up your Bible, download it on your phone, read the text. Couple last things as well. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can follow along and get those notifications when I upload. I generally do Psalms in a Minute on Friday, but then I'm doing the sawdust portions whenever I get them done. I am a full-time pastor, and so I just have time to do these things either on my day off, which is Fridays, or in the evenings. And so the woodworking happens in the evenings, assuming my wife and kids don't have things going on that I'm a part of or want to be a part of. So it's kind of sporadic, but I'm trying to make it less sporadic. So yeah, so hit subscribe. That was a long way of saying if you want to know when things come live, which are randomly, hit the subscribe button. Also, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook. If you want to look me up. I also have a couple books that are out on Amazon. You can find those. Some links down below. As usual, be kind, considerate, compassionate, be full of love, grace, and mercy. Before you leave, your sawdust tip for your week. I mentioned this at the beginning. I struggle with this, but I'm working on it. And that's cleaning when I'm done. Not when the project is necessarily done, but when I'm done for the day. There's a wonderful feeling that happens when you can enter your shop or enter your space or enter your garage or enter your bedroom and have it clean. Now, I'll admit again, I am not good at this, but I'm trying. I have a habit that if I'm not done sanding and I'm just going to be sanding tomorrow, why clean up if I'm just going to be adding to it? So I'll just leave it because why clean up twice? But that's not the best way to approach it. There's something that happens inside, or maybe it's just me, when your space is clean, even if you're not done. So put things away that you're not needing. You don't have to put everything away, but put other things away. Clean up, get out the vacuum, make it tidier, cleaner, and ready for you when you return. It's the same reason why they say you make your bed, make your bed when you get out of it. I don't know why all of a sudden I became talking like that, but make your bed when you get out. Pull the sheets up, make it all nice and tidy. That's your tip for the week. God bless. Have a good day. I'm cold.